Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. Most of the skills that we have in life, just as people, are things that we have to learn. They're not necessarily things we come packaged with. And that includes a lot of virtues and characteristics that we find desirable in people. I personally believe that we all come desiring, wanting love. And so love is something that we basically come packaged with. But expressions of love, being able to experience it in a healthy way, being able to build relationships, these are things that we have to develop over time. They're skills, not necessarily natural talents. So we come to the world with a talent for love, but to have good relationships, we have to build the skill. And I think that a lot of people, if they don't get something the first time, or if something is difficult or challenging, unless as a kid we were taught to push through that initial phase, unless we were taught to keep going in the face of it being a challenge for us, we oftentimes just give up. And that in and of itself is a skill. Pushing through, not giving up, allowing ourselves to keep going in the face of disappointment or frustration, and continuing to build skills even when that's a difficult thing to do. Skill building itself is a skill to build. Well, in this podcast, we want to talk about gratitude and how gratitude is a skill that we develop. Maybe some people have more of a natural talent for it, and they have an easier time of developing the skill. For other people, gratitude might be more difficult for them to build and develop. But gratitude in and of itself is a massive characteristic that not only is desirable to other people, but it is the bedrock upon which we learn all of our life's lessons. If we don't have gratitude when something crappy happens to us, we may be so focused on the bad thing that happened and the result in our life that we completely miss the message or the lesson to be taken from that situation. And when we miss it, then we can't avoid replicating the bad situation in the future. So gratitude isn't just something that creates a nicety. It's not just a desirable characteristic, even though it is, and helps us build better relationships. It's also something that's incredibly important for us to develop in order to not continually have bad situations, in order to orchestrate those bad situations ourselves.
I think gratitude is a narrative tool. It's a structure to give a narrative to something, to say, this thing happened, and I am grateful for it because we'll fill in whatever the reason is. It's a narrative tool to allow us to get out of the mire of a zoomed-in narrative that we're in. So it's almost like a meta-narrative tool. It's a very easy way, or at least if you develop the skill, it can be a way or an access point. I don't want to say easy, but it's an access point to say, this thing happened, and I'm zoomed way on the narrative of what that means. A happened, that equals B, and this means this thing. Gratitude allows us to almost take a step back from that for a moment and to look at it a little bit more objectively, take a little bit more of a meta perspective with an emotion of good-naturedness, like an acceptance and almost like a welcoming of something that happened in a meta perspective. So it gives us a position of like being able to see it distant from us, and then from a positive, almost welcomed stance, say, I'm happy this is in my life because of this even bigger reason than what I thought was the real reason down here that I was all upset about, or maybe it was a good thing too. Like you might have gratitude for things that happen. You might have gratitude for maybe somebody you're in a relationship with, and then you have that, and you can take a meta perspective and just see all the amazing ways. Like it doesn't have to be something bad. It could be all the amazing ways this person means something to you in your life. So I think that's the function that gratitude does. From my perspective, it gives us this meta perspective with a very happy or positive spin on the events we're so zoomed in on.
Yeah, well, and I think you talked about it being, we could be grateful for something good that happens. And I think that's much easier to do. Being grateful for positive experiences or people that, that make us feel good. It's a lot easier to be grateful for those things. If you can't manage, if you can't muster up gratitude for something positive in your life, then that means that you probably are starting from a pretty low level of gratitude. But it's like a muscle. We exercise it, and the better we get at exercising, skill development, exercising, all these metaphors around making something, stronger over time, we can get to a point where we can feel grateful for things that aren't positive experiences in our lives.
Yeah.
Like you said, it gives us a way to create almost a meta perspective over an event or an experience that maybe was kind of horrific or terrible. And once we get a little bit of distance and look for, okay, what is something that can be culled from this? What's some gold that can be mined from this really terrible situation? That's the advanced level that a person can get to. And that's when gratitude really serves us. When we can get to a point where a situation is really bad, or maybe a person has treated us quite terribly, when we can get to a point where we feel grateful for that person having entered our lives, or feel grateful for this terrible thing having happened, now gratitude isn't just a warm, fuzzy feeling or a way of being attractive to other people, right? And keeping a relationship. Now it's one of the tools in our tool belt for having a positive life experience, regardless what that experience is. It's like one of the ways in which we navigate through life with resilience. Gratitude is one of, I think, the ingredients that we must have as a person to have true resilience.
Yeah. The comedian Louis C.K. has this great stand-up comedic bit where he talks about going on an airplane, and they had Wi-Fi on this airplane, and everybody's excited. You know, this is a couple years ago when Wi-Fi was very new on a lot of airplanes. It's still not on every single commercial air flight you take, but often certain airlines have Wi-Fi. And he talks about getting on there, and the announcement is that there's going to be Wi-Fi on this airplane, some to the degree of, you know, it's going to be connected to your computer. Everybody's excited. And then I guess when they get in the air, something happens with the Wi-Fi. His story goes on and talks about the gentleman that's near him, or the guys near him is like, "This is bullcrap, man." It gets really upset that the Wi-Fi is cut out. And Louis C.K. turns it into a humorous comedic bit by saying, like, get some perspective, like have some gratitude. You're in the air on a chair flying through the air at like hundreds of miles an hour to get to your destination. You're on a chair in the sky as a human. You don't have wings. And yet you're like complaining about something you just found out was even an option like 30 seconds ago of having Wi-Fi. Now you're upset you don't have it. It was taken away from you and you're all grumpy and bitchy about it. And it's this idea of, I think that story to me talks about this notion, like what you just talked about, Antonia. If something really amazing happens to us, like something really like over the top, like, you know, a big life event, a new romance, something financially happens that's really epic and awesome, it feels very easy to access gratitude there. Now, I would say that some people can get it for a moment and then it slips from them because they haven't built the skill that we're talking about. They can get it for a moment. They have a fleeting essence of it or a sense of it, but it doesn't stick because it's just a feeling. It's not a sense of a discipline or a way to express themselves. And then you go all the way to the other side of the spectrum, which is something major happens. Maybe a loved one has a really rare disease, or a child is born with some, you know, a challenge in their life, you know, maybe a medical challenge or some type of a developmental challenge, or a parent dies or something extreme happens in your life, and you hit bottom and you're like depressed and sad. And in the midst of everything, your world crumbling around you, you somehow find a way to access this discipline of gratitude and say, you know what, I'm going to be grateful that this bad thing happened. Not that this bad thing happened, but where can I get a meta perspective and see some gratitude in this? I think most of the conversations we have are at one of those extremes often in life. And what I see is there's a daily practice of gratitude. It's this idea that Louis C.K. is talking about in that bit. It's like we go through life and there's these little annoyances that happen to us. This happens to me all the time. Like, it's easy for me when something really bad happens sometimes to be able to find the gratitude more than when I lose Wi-Fi in an airplane, right? Sometimes that's more difficult for me on a daily basis to be grateful for the fact that I'm in an airplane in the sky. So what if I don't have Wi-Fi? I'm getting to my destination in 4 hours instead of like 2 days or 3 days. And yet sometimes for me, that's harder to access than the deep, dark parts that happen to me, or even the super exciting, epic things that happen to me that I can really easily access gratitude for. It's that daily practice that's tough. And so I think this is where the skill development comes in, this idea of it being a discipline or a practice, something that you develop over time and you get better at. It's actually something you can increase your proficiency around. I think for myself, that's really the barometer, the metric that I'm looking at in my life to know, how am I calibrated to this? Am I a grateful person? Do I have gratitude on the little things as much as the big polar opposite things?
Yeah, like the stuff that feels mundane.
Yeah.
that we just totally take for granted. I mean, that is the opposite of gratitude, is taking something for granted, assuming it's always going to be there. And I think one of the things that came up for me as you were talking, which is not really something that I had considered when we talked about doing this podcast, is that there is also a sense that when tragedy strikes, a person might comfort another person by saying, well, by trying to point out something that person could feel grateful for. And when a person is going through like a grief process, that is almost always, like the last thing that somebody would recommend. Like if a child dies, saying, well, at least you have more kids. Like that's a person trying to insinuate something that the person should feel grateful for in the face of horrific tragedy. And that's almost always considered like the worst way to try to comfort somebody, is to try to point out a positive, because the person needs to be able to go through their grief process. Like if your child dies, you legitimately should be able to go through all the different levels of grief that you need to go through before you get to the end of that process with gratitude. So I think one of the things to remember with gratitude is that sometimes it's not always the best emotion to feel immediately. Sometimes it's something that emerges. But if you have a practice of feeling grateful for the mundane and the day-to-day things, if you have a practice that you've built skill and exercised the muscle of gratitude, then as you get through the tragedy or the bad situation, gratitude will be waiting for you on the other side when you're ready for it. And it's not like it makes the situation okay. It's not like it made it an okay situation, but it is a way to look at what happened and be able, not just to be able to feel positive in the face of something negative, but rather to take all of like the reality of the situation. If your child dies and you have another child, the reality of the situation is that probably is, to some extent, something that's going to help get you through. Like that other child is going to create some comfort for you. Now, to insinuate that to another person is callous if that person isn't ready to hear that. But it is the situation. You probably are feeling maybe not everybody, but I would imagine as a parent, that would give me some sense of comfort that I had another child there. So gratitude helps you also see the situation for what it is, so you don't have to stay in a sort of a perpetual state of victimhood. This is one of the ways, if you haven't heard our podcast on the drama triangle versus the empowerment dynamic, I recommend going and checking it out. But there's this false narrative that a lot of us get caught in called the drama triangle, in which we see everything in the world as either a victim, a villain, or a hero. And a lot of times when tragedy strikes, we put ourselves in the position of a victim. And if we stay there, then we oftentimes don't have a lot of power to change the situation, because we're waiting for a hero to save us from the villain, whatever that villain is. And the antidote is to see things in terms of what's called the empowerment dynamic, which swaps out those characters for, instead of a victim, you're a creator. Instead of having a villain, you have challengers. And instead of having a hero, you have coaches. So you don't have somebody save you have somebody help guide you, or a situation helps guide you. The challenge is when you don't have a sense of gratitude, or you don't have a practice of gratitude, it's really hard to get out of the victim position, because you're always seeing things in terms of how you've been hurt by them. You're the victim. You're in a helpless position. And what's so great about gratitude is that it helps remind you that you're actually a creator. If you have enough gratitude, you're not just focused on how you've been affected in a negative way, but you're able to see the situation for the lessons that maybe you can take away, and again, not replicate that situation in the future, or maybe just figure out ways that you can get yourself through the situation. So I've gotten two really huge, terrible pieces of news in my life in the last couple months. The first one is I discovered that my dad had a massive stroke, and he's in the early stages of dementia, which is how his father died. And when his dad died, 40 years ago, he had a massive stroke, and within about 2 to 3 years, he was dead. And of dementia, like a terrible way to go, right? Dementia, like he basically was, practically fetal by the time he was dead. His mind just went. In my entire life, my dad has said, if that ever happens to me, just shoot me, right? Like I don't want to go out that way. If I ever get dementia, just kill me. Well, of course nobody's going to kill him, right? Like he just got the news he has dementia, but if we loved him, we'd kill him. Well, we can't kill you. We can't kill my dad. Like we love him, but we can't provide that service for him. Not really. We can't shoot him. So I'm going to watch my dad from a distance. I'm going to watch my dad die of dementia. And I can tell my parents are both like, they've got, they're trying to be strong about this, but I can tell that they're both freaked out by the situation. And none of it's good, right? Like none of this is happy in any way whatsoever. And honestly, I'm not sure what at the end of all of this I'm going to feel grateful for, because I'm not ready for that experience yet. But I do know that at some point I will be able to find a way to feel gratitude for the situation, because there is some way in which, maybe my estranged parents will be in more contact with me. Maybe I'll be able to see my dad a lot more than he's been willing to spend time with me in the last few years because we've been estranged. Maybe I'll be able to see him a lot more than I was before. There's a lot of different things that can come out of this that will be lessons that will help me be a more resilient person, as opposed to just going, why me?
Yeah.
The second piece of bad news I got is that my hometown is like literally ablaze right now. I grew up in the Columbia River Gorge in Cascade Locks, Oregon. And there was a fire started a little bit ago. And the entire area now, 10,000 acres of one of the most beautiful places on the planet, as far as I'm concerned, is now totally on fire. And they have zero at this time, the time period of this recording. They haven't put it out. They have 0% containment. And so it's just going to keep burning. And so this part of the world that I consider my home is pretty much going to be unrecognizable from this point out. And I don't know if it's going to recover by the time that I get, that I die. Like it might never look the way I remember it for the rest of my life. My parents certainly won't see it, in their lifetime be recovered. So the question is, like, what am I going to end up feeling grateful for? I don't know yet, because the process isn't over. I had a high school friend suggest that we fly out, because she lives in Colorado and I live in Pennsylvania. She was like, I think I'm going to fly out, and as soon as this is over, I'm going to start planting trees. And I've been holding on to that concept, like in a very cathartic way that feels really good to me, this idea of like going and helping in the restoration. But I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. I would like to. I don't know how this is going to pan out. I don't know where I'm going to be able to feel gratitude, but I know I'm going to. And I know it's going to be part of the resilience, as opposed to me asking, why me, right? Why did my hometown, like my dad's dying, my hometown is burning. Like, do I get to have any of my little baby 3-year-old introverted sensing process at all? Like, am I allowed to have any of that? Or is it just all going to go up in flames, right? And because it hits me like at the most, like the past and my connection to my family and connection to my hometown, like this all strikes me at my inferior 3-year-old process. So it's like, I'm not sure how I'm going to navigate through all this, but I do know that I'm going to start really implementing gratitude, skill development right now, so that when I get to the end of the grieving process for all of this, I will be able to take away something that makes me feel stronger and not weaker.
And I think it's this idea of strength. It's not like gratitude doesn't have to be fought for. Like you might, in the midst of these two tragic things, this news you've gotten, my perspective, I mean, I'm with you all the time, and I know your heart and your mind off the recording here of the podcast. And I know it's tough for you. I know you're struggling a lot with it. There's been tears shed. You're grappling with all of this. And there might have to be some inner fight in you to find the ways to be grateful, which I think is a good point, that if gratitude was easy, we'd all be doing it, right? It's not necessarily going to be an easy thing to do or to find in the midst of things that are devastating. And especially in the things that are devastating. Like that's when you have to really fight for that inner gratitude to come out. And I think that's something that we need to make sure as humans we account for, is that it's not like, even if we have a skill developed, it still might, metaphorically, we still might have to grab the sword and charge the hill of battle and fight for this thing that we believe in and that we want to have a part of our lives in the midst of despair and downward stuff. So I think that's a key point, is that gratitude, I believe, has to be fought for. It has to be nurtured. Not only skill, but there has to be bravery and resilience and the ability to say, I'm going to find the gratitude stance in this, regardless of how I feel. I have enough talent developed, but I want to find this. I want to find the gratitude in this thing, and I will fight for it because it's important to me.
Yeah. Well, and I don't have it yet.
Exactly.
Like, 'cause the situations are not done. Like the tragedies themselves are not even complete. Like the Columbia River Gorge is right at the time of this recording is still on fire with 0% containment of the fire. So like I have no idea how bad it's going to get. So it's not even like the tragedy itself isn't even complete. My father is just found out he has early stage dementia a couple months ago. So who knows? I mean, with modern medicine, he might last a lot longer than his father did, or he might not, right? We don't really know. So we have no idea when that tragedy is going to complete. So I actually don't have a general sense of gratitude about either of these, or not a general, but a specific sense of gratitude about either of these situations, because they just started. Like the tragedies have just begun. However, I know that if I keep gratitude in my life in general, like having a general sense of gratitude about everything else, I know that gratitude is waiting for me at the end of it because it's an emergent of a system.
Sure.
And we were looking over some strategies for how to develop and build gratitude. And I think one of the recommendations that I'm going to take to heart, because I think I'm going to need a higher level than I've currently developed. Like I can already tell that I don't have this muscle built like strong enough so that when my dad finally takes his last breath from months, years of going to a very childlike state in this terrible way of dying, like I don't know if I have it to be able to feel gratitude at that time. So I'm going to start shoring it up now. And one of the things that I saw recommended over and over is to keep a gratitude journal. So I'm going to start that immediately. I'm going to start writing down everything I feel grateful for, including the mundane things, so that when I get to the time where I'm going to need it, I have it available for me.
I think the benefit, the thing you can quote unquote be grateful for in the midst of a traumatic experience like your father or like your hometown burning, is that in the midst of that, there is a clear call to you to find gratitude. Like, because it's, like I said earlier in this podcast, because it's on the extreme of the scale, it's on the very back, like the really down part of the scale. It's the really harsh thing. Where else do you have to go? You're hitting bottom there. You have nowhere to go but to look, okay, how can I be grateful? I mean, you could go into despair, obviously. I mean, that's another road, but it definitely seems like maybe the gratitude is not accessible as easily because it's so difficult. You have to fight for it, like I talked about. But at least you have a clear path of what's needed. Like it's a very poignant, clear, here's what you need to do. You got to figure out a way how to be grateful for this. I think so it's challenging and it's a lot of hard work, but the path in front of you is clear. I think the challenge in the day-to-day stuff, I run over a nail and pop my tire on the way to a meeting and now I'm late and now maybe I lose a business deal, or I get my kid to school late and I get a truancy charge, or whatever the thing is in life, right, that happens. That's like annoying, that it's not as clear in the midst of that because it's not harsh enough to trigger in us, oh, I've got to find a way to be grateful about this. Like we just get to sit there and churn in this notion of the thing that happened that might be annoying or bad or whatever, but it's not severe enough to lead us on the path of there's really no way out of this. We're going to have to find a way to be grateful because the situation is so extreme and so bad. So I think that's one thing. And I think the other thing is what's coming out for me is the relative nature of life versus the absolute nature of some of the tools we try to apply to life. So what do I mean by that? There's this idea of absolute wealth. As an example, there's this idea of absolute wealth and relative wealth. Humans do not measure ourselves as wealthy individuals in terms of absolute wealth. We only measure ourselves in terms of relative wealth to the higher end of the spectrum. So, I used to read the Bible. King Solomon is supposedly the wealthiest man that ever lived on the planet, in Bible times, had all this gold, all this wealth. And we look at that and say, oh, that's absolute wealth. But really, in relative terms, in Western society, we're basically more wealthy than Solomon. I mean, we can go down to a local convenience store and buy a bushel of bananas for a few dollars, where Solomon probably had to commission an entire group of men to go out and hack down a tree and bring back a bunch of bananas to him, in the sense of we're wealthy in ways that he wasn't because we just have so much modern convenience and things. And that's just an example of how I think in terms of relative wealth versus absolute wealth. And we never have this idea of being sated with anything. We always look to other people and say, well, they have more, they didn't have this thing happen. I think this is where gratitude comes into, is that we see gratitude in terms of an absolute sense of gratitude when it needs to be applied in relative terms. So we look at something that happens, I lose my Wi-Fi on a plane, I'm like, if only I'd flown that airline over there, I'd have Wi-Fi. but I don't. So now I'm ungrateful for the situation, or I'm like bitchy about it when I could have had this. We're measuring in terms of what we have and what we're grateful for in terms of what we could have had or what we could have been grateful for. And I think this, like, I don't have all the tenets of, I don't have all this worked out in my head yet, but I'm noticing something emerge in my mind to where there's something to the degree that the reason why it's a skill that needs to be developed is because there's no absolute nature of what we're going to be grateful for. The ground underneath us of these things are shifting constantly in relation to the other things in life. So you could look even at the lowest part, you look at your dad and go, man, why am I the one that has a dad that's dying of this? I mean, that's an example. Someone could say that. I don't think you would say that, Antonia. But someone could grapple with that. And it's hard to find gratitude because you just can't wrap your head around like why you, right? It's like this hard thing to recognize and to realize and to accept because you're looking at things in relative terms to others or other situations or other people. And there's something in here to say that this, I think, is why the discipline or the training is so important, because there's no absolute training you're going to have around this. You're not going to like develop gratitude as like, okay, I got that covered. It's constantly shifting of what you have to apply it to. And so the more things you can find in your daily life to apply it to, relatively, you're going to develop it better, and it's going to be more of a usable tool in whatever comes to you in your life.
Yeah, you're already used to applying it to any and everything, so you can apply it to any and everything. That's the discipline, is being able to apply. I think that's a really brilliant point. Something you mentioned before too was that when we have mundane stuff happen to us, you know, when you talked about running over a nail and popping the tire on the way to a meeting, that like literally happened a couple weeks ago. Actually, I don't think we were on the way to a meeting, but we were coming home very late at night with a car full of kids, and it was like 11 o'clock at night from a trip, and then the tire pops, and we were supposed to go do something the next day, and it was like, oh, do we really need this right now? And I think one of the elements of gratitude skill building is speed of implementation. Like I mentioned, the tragedies that I'm experiencing right now, they haven't even completed. Like I'm not even sure what the sum total of the tragedy is going to be. And yet, if you get good at applying gratitude in all areas of your life quickly, then you do have the ability to, implement gratitude earlier in the process than later. And like I said, I'm not really sure how it's going to pan out right now, because I'm still kind of sort of almost not confused by the situation, but you know how like when things are big and you're not really prepped for them, it kind of it gives a sense of destabilization. Like I'm still kind of wrapping my head around everything that's going on right now. And I'm still not 100% sure how I feel about all this, which is no surprise because I'm never sure how I feel about anything. But I'm getting, like those moments when I'm in the shower and it hits me and I'm like, oh, I think I'm going to cry now, right? Like, and I start crying and I'm like, this is terrible. This is a horrible, terrible thing that's happening to me. And then I the catharsis enters, and then I'm done. And then now I can go on with my day. But then I'm still not 100% sure, like the level these things are going to hit me. So it's hard for me to implement gratitude speedily. But like you mentioned, there are still ways that I can show up with gratitude in this situation. Like take, for example, that I've done a lot of personal development work. And so because I've done so much development work, I know it's going to be okay. I've been through bad things in the past, and I hadn't done development work then. Like when my sister died in 2003, I hadn't done like 2 seconds of personal development work at that time. And not only did I not have any preparation for it, I couldn't even experience the grief until 5 years later. Like I couldn't even begin to process the situation for 5 full years. And then when my mind finally allowed me to process it, like it was so overwhelming, I wasn't even sure what to do about it. And so I'm grateful that since then, I was introduced to the concept of personal development, and I know it's going to be okay. Like I know I'm going to get through it. I know it's going to be fine. And I can feel total gratitude that I've been working on a discipline that's going to help me navigate the situation. Maybe not beautifully, maybe not elegantly. I'm probably going to make all sorts of missteps through the process. It won't be a fully Buddha-like transcendent experience for me where I'm totally fine with the whole process, but I will get through it a lot more elegantly than I did, say, my sister's death. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful to know that I can build skill and gratitude, and it's going to be waiting for me at the end of this situation. So there is still things to feel gratitude for and to implement those early. And also, I'm allowing myself to not feel gratitude until I've fully taken in all of the experience. And I don't think you have to necessarily feel gratitude for the whole experience early before you even had the experience. But it is a discipline. I think that's mostly what we're focused on right now is not, hey, feel grateful for the terrible shit that happens in your life. And if you don't feel grateful, then you're somehow non-transcended or you're like undeveloped. I think it's more do what you can to build this very useful skill because it's going to come in handy for you. And even if you bumble your way through the process of building it, that's okay because you're doing it for yourself anyway. And gratitude has a sense of magic to it. Like it can be so magically, gratitude can be so magically cleansing. It can be something that really creates a ballast in a situation that would otherwise have no bright, like light at the end of the tunnel. And so I think that's really what we're encouraging is develop a practice of it, like say thank you a lot. If you're a person who finds yourself lacking gratitude, just like a little kid, we make little kids, we're trying to teach them gratitude. So we make them say thank you to people who do nice things for them. We'll start that. Just start saying thank you all the time for everything. Say thank you for everything, even bad stuff. Say thank you. Just get in the practice of expressing it. Keep a journal like I'm about to do. I haven't started at the time of this podcast, but I'm actually pretty, I'm pretty encouraged by the idea of doing it. So I'm going to start a gratitude journal. And that's one of the things that's a recommendation to do when you're trying to build gratitude. A
mental discipline that I've tried to do recently is I try to ask myself any annoyance or any quote unquote bad thing. I'm not talking a big epic bad thing, but little annoyances like running over a nail with my car, popping my tire, or being delayed for this, or not getting this deadline met is I keep asking myself, how can I find gratitude in this? What can I be grateful in the midst of this? And sometimes it's just grateful for the event that I'm alive for this event to happen in my life. Like at the very end of the day, my life itself, I want to be grateful for. My existence, I want to be grateful for. And by existing, that means all sorts of things are going to happen to me and with me in life. Whatever those things are, if I can say, you know what, this is a moment in my life, and I'm grateful for getting this moment in my life, even just the experience itself, a story I could tell somebody someday, a lesson learned. There's all sorts of things we can pull out, but I think it comes down to this discipline of just continually asking ourselves that question and slowing down enough to be able to ask it. When the bad thing happens, stop for a moment, go, where can I find the gratitude in this thing that's annoying the crap out of me or making me annoyed or upsetting me or somebody treated me mean or somebody said something to me or I feel bad about this. And I think there's this practice here in the United States. We have our American holiday called Thanksgiving every November. And a lot of families will go around a table. They sit down for Thanksgiving. They go, let's all tell each other one thing we're grateful for. It's kind of a tradition a lot of families will practice during that holiday here in the United States. And I don't think I've ever been at one of those gatherings where someone articulates something negative that happened in their life they're grateful for. It's always like, well, I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for my kids, grateful for my house, a lot of material possessions. A few people are grateful for other people. But I very rarely, if ever, I don't think I've ever heard somebody say, I'm grateful that business deal last year fell through because it taught me how to blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Or I'm grateful that my girlfriend broke up with me last week because I had to go through a really dark time and get centered with myself and learn more about myself. Or I just got the experience of being broken up with for the first time or whatever it is. Like you don't hear that very much when people articulate what they're grateful for. And you also don't hear people articulate very much the things they're grateful for not happening. It's this idea of somebody like your father in a situation, he might look at himself and say, well, why me? Why did I have this happen to me? And other times it's things didn't happen to you you can be grateful for. People in life, like I'm very healthy and I go through my days going, I'm grateful I don't have a terminal disease. I'm grateful I don't have major health problems. I'm grateful for the lack of something in my life as well as the things that are in my life, which I think we can also be grateful for. And again, you could start to think of creative ways. How could you keep applying this to more and more areas of your life? This idea of gratitude spiraling out. What else could you possibly be grateful for? What other things that are almost counterintuitive or feel silly or weird to be grateful for? Are there ways to extend your gratitude to those things or those people or those objects in your life as well? And you get to get really creative about where gratitude could be applied. And then you start to live in the essence of gratitude. I think I've read online the attitude of gratitude, right? This like pithy statement, but it's this sense, this place of being, no longer a thing you do or even a skill you develop. You get to the stance of just being in a present moment state of gratitude at all moments, which I would love to get to in my life, because then I feel like it really doesn't matter what happens in my life. I have an ability to go somewhere and have resonance of, wow, I'm just grateful to be here.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned that you can be grateful for the things that aren't happening in your life, including tragedies. And when you're going through a tragedy, it's hard to be grateful, for the tragedies you're not experiencing, because that might feel too much. But I think what it is at the lowest level here, we don't feel grateful because we're comparing ourselves to the things we want, or the people having things that we would like to have, or situations we'd like to have. They don't have to be material. It could just be like a happy relationship, or children. If you want a child and you're struggling to have a child, or somebody, people can have all sorts of things that we desire. And then it's hard to feel gratitude in that. And then we flip it and we realize, well, we have situations that are good in comparison to others, and we can feel grateful for that. So I think that that's the first step. But I really feel like when you've developed the skill long enough, you can actually get out of the comparison game. Like, you don't have to feel grateful because you're not experiencing something bad that somebody else is experiencing. It's no longer, I think that that's like the next level up. If you're feeling a lack of gratitude through comparison, the better frame is to feel gratitude through comparison. But I think the really transcended piece is gratitude without comparing at all. Just experiencing your life and being mindful and being in it, and recognizing that there is good here. Like, no matter what the situation, there is reasons for resilience, and there is something to take from this that is positive. And it doesn't have to really be about what you have or don't have. It's just is. It's just an experience of is. And I think if you're struggling with gratitude, and that's through comparison, and you'd like to elevate to the next level up, which is gratitude through comparison as opposed to a lack of gratitude through comparison, I think things like volunteering can be really powerful. Volunteering is super powerful because you engage with people who need your help. And so that's one way to really kind of feel like you can be grateful for simply being there to be able to serve them. And at first you can feel grateful because you're not in their bad situation, but then eventually you get grateful just for being, just being able to serve other people and being in a position to do that. So I think volunteering is really powerful. And I also think one thing that I read online was like improving the happiness of your life in other ways, meaning that if you're going through a tough situation, like, do what you can to be a creator of positivity in other elements of your life. Like, spend time with loved ones, improve your life in whatever ways that you can improve them. And so if you're experiencing something that's a challenge, like your hometown is burning and about to turn into cinders, there's ways to create positivity around that. One of the things that I thought of, a friend of mine, I think I already mentioned it, that she mentioned that she was going to go plant trees. Did I already mention that?
Yeah.
And I've just really been kind of holding on to that idea. Like, that feels like, once this is all said and done, flying out to my hometown and planting some trees, it's like a little thing. It's probably not going to make that big of a dent, but I think it'll be big for me. I think I'll feel an expression of gratitude being able to have a part in the reparation of something that was very painful to me. So I think there's always a way to get to that space, as long as you build the discipline of it.
What do you think? You've been listening with us. You've been the third person in this conversation. I want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Leave a comment, ask a question directly below this podcast, and let us know where you're at with gratitude in your life. Has this been something you've been really able to access? Do you have some techniques and things we didn't mention that you figured out and you're like, hey, I got to share these. This is a great tool for me to be more grateful in my life. This is something I've really learned around this. Or you've got questions for the community, to say, hey, I'm struggling in this area. What do y'all think? Not just me and Antonia, but other people of like minds are here orbiting around Personality Hacker, and they're a great tribe for you to connect with. In fact, the best way to do that would be head over to facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack and join in with other like minds like yourself that like to talk about these things, that like to grow themselves, like to push each other, like to encourage each other. I think it's a great starting point for you. Yeah.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you feel grateful for the podcast, you can let us know by leaving us a rating and review on iTunes. That helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
I am grateful you've been listening this week with us here at Personality Hacker. And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.